A homeless man helped an elderly lady with her groceries and disappeared. When her son found his mother crying while holding a medallion, he decided to go after the homeless man. Alfred Tyler walked slowly through a small Texas town. The air was warm, and his feet were sore from sleeping on hard surfaces. He carried a worn backpack with a few clothes, a rolled-up blanket, and a bottle of water. He had no home. He had once been a skilled carpenter before Hurricane Harvey struck in 2017. That storm had taken both his house and his wife, Sophia. Before the disaster, Alfred had lived a stable life. He had worked with care and pride, shaping wood into furniture, repairing porches, and building modest homes. He had shared a small but comfortable house with Sophia, and they attended church together every Sunday. After the hurricane, everything changed. Alfred lost his home when floodwaters destroyed the wooden walls he had built himself. His wife, Sophia, was trapped during the storm and did not survive. After that, Alfred could not find a reason to keep living as he once did. He drifted from place to place, taking odd jobs where he could. He had no fixed address, moving between shelters and the streets. He tried to hold on to his faith at first, but each passing year made it harder. He no longer attended church, and he rarely prayed. He slept poorly most nights, waking up to the sound of strangers coughing or arguing in overcrowded shelters. Many days, Alfred ended up near a local supermarket. It was a medium-sized store with a parking lot where customers pushed carts and loaded groceries into their cars. He would stand on the edges of that lot, watching people come and go. It reminded him of the times he and Sophia went shopping for basic supplies. They had never been wealthy, but they had enough to be comfortable. He remembered her laughter, her gentle advice, and the way she smiled when he carried the bags for her. Now he felt invisible. Customers would glance away, uncomfortable with the sight of a homeless man standing nearby. Alfred never begged for money. Sometimes he offered to return stray shopping carts for a coin or two. Occasionally, a shopper would hand him loose change or a piece of fruit. He appreciated those small gestures, but he did not expect them. He tried to maintain some dignity, even though he knew he looked worn and tired. His clothes were old and dirty, his face unshaven. He tried to wash up at public restrooms when possible, but it was never enough to look truly presentable. He remembered the first few months after the hurricane, when he still tried to rebuild his life. He had applied for carpentry work, but most projects had halted due to the disaster. Jobs were scarce, and as time passed, people forgot about him. He had a few tools left in his backpack, but nothing substantial. Without a proper home or workshop, he could not do much with them. He learned to accept small tasks, cleaning a yard, painting a fence, sweeping a porch. But these opportunities were rare, and he often found himself idle. The loss of Sophia weighed heavily on him. He carried a medallion in his backpack with her photograph inside. It was a simple piece of cheap metal, not valuable to anyone else, but precious to him. The photo inside showed Sophia smiling gently. He would sometimes hold it in his hand late at night, trying to recall her voice. He wondered if she would be disappointed to see him living this way. He wondered if she would still believe in a higher purpose. He felt that his faith had vanished along with her. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Alfred stood near the supermarket's entrance. He watched as cars pulled in and out, their headlights flickering across the pavement. He noticed how families worked together to load their groceries. He saw how couples shared tasks without speaking, moving in a comfortable rhythm. He missed that sense of unity. He missed having a partner who cared about him and who he could care for in return. It pained him that people avoided his gaze. He understood why. He looked rough, and some might think he was dangerous or unstable. He was just a man who had lost too much and had not managed to recover. He asked himself if he would ever regain a fraction of the life he had before. Would he ever build anything again that lasted more than a day? Would he ever find a reason to trust in something greater than himself? While he stood there, he noticed an elderly woman leaving the store. She seemed to be moving slowly, carrying heavy bags that strained her arms. Alfred watched as she paused to rest near a parked car, placing one bag on the ground. She appeared to be in her 70s, with white hair neatly tied back. She wore simple clothes and looked around as if hoping someone would help. Most people passing by were focused on their own tasks. Alfred felt a stirring inside him. This woman reminded him of his own mother struggling with heavy bags long ago. He remembered how he used to help her without hesitation. Now he stood uncertain, aware that his current appearance might alarm her. He considered stepping forward, but hesitated. If he did nothing, he would regret it. Something told him this moment mattered. He decided he would at least try. As he prepared to approach, she adjusted her grip on the bags. Alfred took a breath and moved toward her, determined to speak gently and offer help without expecting anything in return. He hoped she would not be afraid. He knew his heart was in the right place. Maybe this would mean something. He continued forward, his heart beating faster. He paused briefly, noticing the woman's tired expression. He raised his hand slightly and cleared his throat. He planned to speak calmly and politely. He wanted her to understand that he meant well. He took another step closer and said in a steady voice, "Excuse me, ma'am. Do you need some help with those bags?" He waited for her response, hoping she would not be afraid. The woman turned her head and looked at him. Her eyes were cautious, but not hostile. Alfred offered a small, friendly nod. He tried to appear patient. He realized that this moment could be a simple action, but it felt meaningful. The sun was almost gone, and the parking lot was getting darker. Alfred noticed a few distant voices and a car door closing somewhere behind him. He focused on the woman in front of him, waiting for her answer. He had no expectations beyond this small act of kindness. Whether she accepted or refused, he would know he had tried. He had reached out instead of remaining silent. For the first time, Alfred felt that he was doing something that aligned with his old values. He hoped it might guide him toward a better path. He stood there, steady and calm, prepared to help a stranger who reminded him of his own mother's struggles. Early the next morning, Alfred woke inside a crowded shelter. He had slept lightly, disturbed by the sounds of others shifting in their bunks and coughing in the stale air. He felt stiff and tired, without any clear plan for the day. He rose, rolled up his blanket, and stepped outside. The air was still warm, and he knew the sun would soon make it uncomfortable to walk too far. Alfred decided to return to the supermarket. He did not expect a job, but sometimes people needed small favors, and he might earn a few coins. Still, he felt discouraged. He had not worked steadily in years, and his hope of finding a stable position had faded. He wondered if there was any point in asking around. Most employers wanted someone with a clean appearance and a permanent address. He had neither. As he approached the supermarket, he saw a few cars pulling in and some early customers heading inside. He found a spot near the edge of the parking lot and waited, observing the morning routine. He thought about the elderly woman from the previous evening. He had tried to help her, but he had not stayed long enough to know her name or see if she was all right afterward. He wished he had at least introduced himself. A short time later, as he stood watching, he saw the same elderly woman exiting the store again. She balanced several heavy bags, her arms trembling slightly under the weight. Alfred recognized her and felt a small spark of purpose. He had approached her before with good intentions. He could do it again, this time more confidently. He walked toward her without hesitating. "Ma'am," he said in a gentle voice, "would you like some help with those bags?" He tried to stand straight, to look as presentable as possible. She looked at him, and this time she seemed to remember him. She nodded, allowing him to take a few bags from her hands. "Thank you," she said quietly. "My name is Mary Johnson." Alfred introduced himself as Alfred Tyler. He noticed that she did not seem frightened or uneasy. She led him along a sidewalk and then across a quiet street. They moved slowly, and he made sure not to rush her. He carried the heaviest bags, and she held one lighter bag. They reached a small house with a neatly kept yard. Mary unlocked the door and invited Alfred inside. He hesitated for a moment, then stepped in carefully. The house was simple and clean. He placed the bags on the kitchen table, trying to be gentle with everything. Mary thanked him again and reached into her purse. She offered him a small amount of cash, but Alfred shook his head. "No, thank you," he said. "I'm just glad I could help." He meant it. He had done this simply because it felt right, not because he expected payment. Mary did not insist. Instead, she looked at him with kind eyes. "It is rare to see someone turn down money," she said softly. Alfred felt a slight warmth inside, knowing he had done something good. He excused himself and stepped outside, not wanting to overstay his welcome. As he left, he waved goodbye, and Mary waved back. He returned to the street, feeling more useful than he had in a very long time. Walking away, Alfred realized that he felt lighter. He had helped someone who needed it. He had done so without asking for anything. He could hardly remember the last time he felt that his actions had value. He turned a corner, heading toward a familiar area where he sometimes rested. He wanted to hold on to this feeling for a while. Later that afternoon, he decided to go back to the shelter. It was not much, but it was a place where he could sit and think. He dug into his backpack, intending to look at Sophia's photograph in the medallion as he sometimes did. He searched through his clothes and small items, growing more anxious as he failed to find it. He checked each pocket, unfolded every shirt, and shook out the blanket. The medallion was gone. Alfred's heart sank. That medallion was all he had left of Sophia. He tried to stay calm and think where he could have lost it. He remembered checking his bag last night, and it was still there then. He had helped Mary carry groceries in the morning. Could it have slipped out while he was carrying the bags? Perhaps it fell near her house or somewhere along the way. He left the shelter immediately, retracing his steps. He went back toward the supermarket, scanning the sidewalks and street corners. He looked into the gutter and behind a low fence. He became more desperate as time passed without any sign of the medallion. He felt panic rising in his chest. Without that photograph, he had nothing tangible to connect him to Sophia. It was as if he had lost her all over again. Alfred checked the supermarket parking lot. He inspected the small area where he had first spoken to Mary. He even peeked around the spot where they had crossed the street. Still, there was no medallion. The sun was setting now, and the long shadows made it even harder to spot anything on the ground. His anxiety grew. He felt tears welling up but blinked them away. He wondered if he should knock on Mary's door and ask if she had found anything. He worried that might alarm her. He did not want to seem desperate or ungrateful. He remembered how carefully he had placed the bags on her table and how he had left right after. Could it have dropped inside her house? Without any better idea, Alfred decided to wait until morning. Maybe he could see Mary at the supermarket again. Perhaps she would notice the medallion among her groceries. He tried to calm himself, but the feeling of loss was crushing. He returned to the shelter, found a corner to sit, and held his head in his hands. He wanted to pray, but he was not sure who would listen. Still, he whispered a few words, hoping that somehow things might work out. As darkness filled the room, Alfred felt more alone than he had in years. He thought about Sophia and how much he missed her. He remembered the way she encouraged him and how she kept him strong. Now he had only the memory, no physical object to hold. He realized that he must find that medallion, no matter what. He promised himself that tomorrow he would try again. He closed his eyes, feeling the ache in his chest. The kindness he had shown Mary was overshadowed now by this sudden loss. He wondered if fate was punishing him. He struggled to hold on to any positive thought. In the silence of the shelter, he pushed back despair as best he could and waited for the morning. Early the next morning, Alfred left the shelter and went straight to the supermarket parking lot. He wanted to arrive before many customers showed up, hoping he might spot the medallion somewhere on the ground. The sky was still a bit dark, and a few cars were parked near the entrance. He walked around slowly, scanning the pavement and checking under carts. He looked between cars and along the fences that surrounded the lot. Nothing stood out. He could not find the small object that meant so much to him. He remembered how the medallion had been his connection to Sophia. He had lost so many things in the hurricane, but this simple keepsake had survived. It had comforted him at his lowest moments. Now it was gone, and he felt that he had let Sophia's memory slip through his fingers. He felt ashamed for being careless. He replayed the events in his mind, trying to pinpoint exactly when he could have dropped it. He remembered carrying Mary's groceries into her home. Maybe it fell out of his backpack then. Alfred considered going directly to Mary's house to ask if she had seen it, but he hesitated. He did not want to frighten her or appear desperate. He wondered if he should wait at the supermarket and hope that she returned. She might come back someday to shop again. Still, he was restless. He walked over to the sidewalk and stared in the direction of Mary's home. He remembered the route they had taken together. He decided to check the path quietly. He followed the path they had taken the previous day, stopping every few steps to look at the ground. He checked near the curb and even under some low shrubs. Nothing was there. He passed Mary's home and glanced at the windows. There were curtains drawn, and he was not sure if anyone was awake. He did not have the courage to knock on the door unannounced. He turned back, feeling defeated. Returning to the supermarket area, Alfred tried to calm himself by thinking of Sophia's words. She had always encouraged him to have faith and patience. He tried to believe that somehow things would work out, but it was hard. He had lost his faith in recent years, and the absence of the medallion felt like a final blow. Without it, he felt truly alone. He spent the rest of the morning searching. He asked a few employees on their break if they had found anything small and metal, but none had. He checked the lost and found inside the store. The clerk shook her head, saying no one had turned in anything like that. Alfred felt his heart sink lower. He stepped outside and sat on a low wall, resting his head in his hands. He wondered what he would do next. He tried to remain logical. The medallion might still be at Mary's home. Maybe it fell into one of her grocery bags. If that happened, maybe she would find it. Maybe she would bring it back here if she realized it belonged to him. Alfred knew this was a fragile hope, but it was all he had. He decided to return to the shelter for now. There was nothing more he could do at the moment. Later in the day, Alfred found himself walking aimlessly around town. He had no direction and no tasks that needed doing. He thought about his past before the hurricane, about how he had worked with a sense of purpose. He had been a respected carpenter, always busy building or repairing something. He had taken pride in his skills. Now he felt useless. He had no tools to make a living and no stable home. He took a seat on a bench near a small park. Children were playing, and parents watched them. He tried not to stare too long. He felt out of place, as if he did not belong in normal society anymore. He thought about what would happen if he never found the medallion. Could he live without that reminder of Sophia? Would he begin to forget her face or her voice? As the sun lowered in the sky, Alfred returned to the shelter. He ate a small meal, something provided by volunteers. He tried to rest, but his mind kept drifting back to the medallion. He thought about going out again after dark, but he realized it would be too hard to see anything in the dark. He would just have to wait until morning, hoping Mary might appear at the supermarket. That night, Alfred slept very little. He remembered the life he once had with Sophia. He remembered how they attended church and prayed together. He had stopped praying after losing her. He felt that his prayers had gone unanswered. But now he felt desperate. He considered trying to pray again. He did not know how to begin. He whispered a few simple words, asking for some guidance or sign. The next morning, he woke up still tired, but he forced himself to return to the supermarket. He waited in the parking lot, observing each customer carefully. He looked for Mary's familiar face, scanning the crowds as people came and went. Hours passed. He grew anxious. He walked back and forth, trying not to draw unwanted attention to himself. Still, Mary did not appear. At midday, Alfred realized how tense he was. He had to accept the possibility that he might never see that medallion again. The thought made him feel empty inside. He lowered his head and stepped away, taking a short walk around the block. He did not know what else to do. As he circled back to the supermarket, he tried to prepare himself for more disappointment. He had done everything he could think of to find what he had lost. He had scanned every corner, asked employees, and checked the lost and found. He had considered speaking to Mary directly, but held back out of uncertainty. Now he felt near the point of giving up. Perhaps he would never have that tangible link to Sophia again. He lingered near the store's entrance, unsure of his next move. He had not found any small jobs that day, and he had not eaten since breakfast. His body felt weak, and his spirit even weaker. He decided to sit near a bench outside the supermarket, just waiting. He wanted to give Mary one more chance to appear. If she did not, he would have to accept the loss and move on, though he did not know how. The afternoon light began to change, and the heat softened. Alfred watched people go about their routines, loading groceries into cars, talking on their phones, moving on with their lives. He felt disconnected from this world. He was an outsider looking in. He thought about how simple it had been to help Mary carry her bags. That action had felt right. It had made him feel human again. Now, as he sat there empty-handed, he wondered if doing good could ever lead him back to something positive. On the following morning, Mary Johnson arrived at the supermarket earlier than usual. She had discovered the medallion while putting away her groceries the previous night. It had slipped into one of the bags. She recognized the importance of this object to the man who had helped her. She knew his name was Alfred Tyler because he had introduced himself. Now she wanted to return it and reassure him that she appreciated his kindness. Mary entered the store and spoke quietly to a cashier, describing Alfred's appearance. The cashier frowned, trying to remember. Another employee nearby recalled a homeless man who often stood outside. The staff had seen him many times, but knew very little about him. Mary held up the medallion, showing them the small photograph inside. She explained that Alfred must have lost it while helping her carry groceries. At that moment, Jacob Johnson, Mary's son, walked in. He was the owner of the supermarket. He was in his late 30s, neatly dressed, and always busy managing the store's operations. He noticed his mother speaking to his employees and approached to see what was happening. Mary explained that a homeless man had helped her carry groceries home without asking for anything in return, and during that process, he had lost his medallion. She showed it to Jacob, who looked at the photo of the smiling woman inside. Jacob felt a gentle pull at his heart. He understood that whoever this man was, the medallion was valuable to him. He looked around, wondering where Alfred might be. He asked his employees to keep an eye out for him. The employees nodded, and one of them stepped outside to see if Alfred was nearby. Mary waited, holding the medallion carefully. She felt a responsibility to return it. She was impressed that Alfred had refused her attempt to pay him. It was uncommon to see someone in such a difficult situation being so generous. She hoped he would appear soon. She had a feeling that this was important. Jacob spoke quietly to Mary, asking her for more details. She told him how kind Alfred had been and how much effort he put into carrying her heavy bags. Jacob thought about all the people who passed through his store. Very few made such gestures. He managed a team of employees and served many customers, but acts of pure kindness like this were rare. A short while later, The employee who went outside returned, saying he had spotted a man who fit Alfred's description sitting on a bench nearby. Mary held the medallion tightly and followed Jacob outside, hoping to find Alfred. As they approached, Mary saw Alfred's familiar figure. He looked worried and tired, and it pained her to think that he might be missing something so important. Jacob and Mary stepped closer. Mary spoke first. "Alfred?" she said in a warm, gentle tone. Alfred looked up, surprised to see Mary and a man he did not know standing next to her. He recognized Mary immediately, though he had not expected to see her again. He stood up, trying to appear calm, but his heart was pounding. Mary reached out and opened her hand, showing Alfred the medallion. "I believe this is yours," she said. Alfred's eyes widened, and he carefully took the medallion. He held it in his hands and saw Sophia's photograph. He felt relief flood through him. He thanked Mary several times, his voice shaking slightly. He was grateful beyond words. Jacob watched this scene, touched by the emotional importance of the item. He introduced himself to Alfred and explained that he owned the supermarket. Alfred nodded politely, still focused on the medallion. Jacob asked Alfred to tell his story, and Alfred hesitated, unsure if he should burden them with details. He decided to be honest, summarizing how he lost his home and wife in the hurricane, how he had once been a carpenter, and how he had ended up living on the streets. Mary listened carefully, her eyes full of understanding. Jacob also listened, feeling a need to do something. He respected Alfred's resilience. He admired how Alfred helped Mary without expecting any reward. He wondered if there was a way to assist Alfred in finding a new direction. Jacob could offer small jobs around the store, but he had a particular idea. He noticed that many older customers struggled with heavy bags, just like his mother. Alfred could help them, and in doing so, regain some stability. Jacob spoke to Alfred, choosing his words carefully. He said he understood that Alfred had faced terrible hardships. He said he wanted to help and offered him a job at the supermarket. The job would not be complicated. Alfred could assist elderly customers, carrying their groceries and helping them reach their cars. He would receive a fair wage, enough to save some money, and maybe rent a small room somewhere. It would be a start, a chance to rebuild his life in a modest but meaningful way. Alfred was stunned. He had never expected such an offer. He looked at Mary, who nodded encouragingly. He looked at Jacob, who seemed sincere. He considered the possibility that this could be the turning point he had been longing for. He was afraid, of course. He worried about what people would think, or if he would fail. But he knew he had to try. He could not remain in limbo forever. He thanked Jacob and accepted the offer, his voice unsteady. Jacob smiled slightly and told Alfred they could sort out the details tomorrow morning. Mary placed a hand on Alfred's arm and said she was glad to have helped him. She reminded him that he deserved this opportunity. Alfred held the medallion in his pocket now, feeling that he was not losing Sophia's memory, but keeping it alive by moving forward. They parted ways, and Alfred remained near the supermarket for a few more minutes, collecting his thoughts. He felt a mixture of relief, gratitude, and nervous anticipation. Tomorrow he would begin working. He had not worked a regular job in years. He would have to earn people's trust. He would have to overcome the judgments of those who recognized him from his days of homelessness. But with the medallion returned, and this unexpected offer from Jacob, he felt that something positive was finally happening. He walked away slowly, heading toward the shelter with a clear intention. He would rest tonight, prepare himself, and arrive ready to work the next day. He had a reason to hope again. He had been shown kindness by strangers. That meant his world was not entirely broken. Perhaps he could find a place in it once more. The next morning, Alfred arrived early at the supermarket. He wore a simple, clean shirt and a pair of pants that Jacob had arranged for him through one of the employees. His hair was trimmed, and his face was shaved. He still looked a bit thin and tired, but he appeared more like a man ready to work than someone who slept in shelters. He stood near the entrance, waiting for instructions. He felt nervous, but he tried to remain calm. Jacob approached him with a friendly nod. He explained the duties. Alfred would help elderly customers with their bags, escort them to their cars if needed, and assist in loading groceries. Alfred understood. He nodded, trying to appear confident, even though he was not entirely sure how customers would react to him. He knew some people might recognize him from before when he had stood outside. Would they trust him now? A few employees greeted Alfred politely. Some knew who he was. Others were simply curious about the new helper. Jacob introduced him to a couple of staff members who managed the front area. They explained where carts were stored, how to identify customers who might need help, and what areas he should focus on. Alfred listened carefully. He began by helping a woman in her late 60s who struggled with several heavy bags. He approached slowly and asked if she would like assistance. She hesitated, observing him. She seemed unsure at first, but after a moment, she agreed. Alfred carried her bags to her car, packed them in the trunk, and wished her a good day. She thanked him and even smiled a bit, though she still seemed cautious. With each new customer, Alfred practiced his approach. He spoke softly, with respect. He offered help, but never insisted if someone refused. Over time, he noticed that some customers accepted his help more easily after seeing him assist others. He moved quietly, careful not to draw unnecessary attention. He did not want anyone to think he was bothering people. He wanted to earn their trust. Around midday, Jacob came by to see how he was doing. Alfred admitted he was still nervous, but he said he was doing his best. Jacob gave him a reassuring look and said it would become easier as time went on. He reminded Alfred that he was there because of his genuine kindness, not because anyone felt sorry for him. Jacob wanted Alfred to understand that his job was valuable. As the day progressed, Alfred carried more bags, opened car doors, and even rearranged boxes for a few older customers. Some thanked him politely, others just nodded, but he could see that many appreciated the extra help. One elderly man, who walked with a cane, seemed especially grateful. He told Alfred that it was good to see a younger man willing to help without complaining. Alfred simply nodded, grateful for the kind words. Near the late afternoon, Alfred recognized a couple who had given him spare change months ago when he stood outside the parking lot. He remembered how they had quickly looked away afterward. Now, as he offered to help with their groceries, they paused. The husband looked Alfred up and down, then handed him a set of bags. Alfred handled them with care and followed them to their car. The wife thanked him, and as they drove away, the man nodded silently, as if acknowledging some change in Alfred's circumstances. Alfred felt a mixture of relief and pride. He was doing honest work, and slowly, people were accepting him in this new role. He realized that he needed to be patient. He could not change everyone's perceptions immediately, but he could show them through consistent effort that he was trustworthy and capable. By the end of the day, Alfred's arms felt tired and his feet were sore. He returned the last empty cart to the entrance and stood by the door, waiting to see if anyone else needed help. Jacob approached him again, this time carrying a small envelope. He explained that this was Alfred's payment for the day. It was not a large amount, but it was fair. Alfred looked at the money and felt a sense of accomplishment. He had earned it through honest work, not by begging or relying on handouts. Mary appeared at that moment, having come by to see how Alfred's first day had gone. She smiled at him and said she was proud of his efforts. She mentioned that she often ran errands for older neighbors, and that many of them could use a helping hand with groceries. Alfred nodded, grateful for her support. He understood that Mary's acceptance and encouragement mattered. After all, her need for assistance had led him to this job. As the supermarket closed for the day, Alfred thanked Jacob and Mary and said he would return the next morning. Jacob gave him a few suggestions on how to improve efficiency, but overall, He seemed satisfied with Alfred's performance. Alfred walked away into the evening light, feeling more hopeful than he had in a long time. He headed toward the shelter, knowing that soon he might be able to afford a small room if he saved his earnings. He could wash his clothes regularly, maybe buy better shoes. He could try to restore some stability to his life. He thought about the medallion in his pocket. He touched it lightly, remembering Sophia's face. He felt she would be proud of him for trying to move forward without losing his values. That night, Alfred slept a bit better. He was still in a shelter, but this time, he had a plan. He had a purpose. He was no longer an invisible figure lurking on the edges of society. He was a working man who helped others, just like he had done in the past when he was a carpenter. This feeling allowed him to rest more peacefully than he had in years. Alfred arrived early again the following morning. He wore the same clothes, now freshly washed at a local laundromat using some of his earnings. He felt more confident, though he knew he still had a long way to go. He set to work immediately, scanning the parking lot for anyone who might need help. A few customers recognized him from the previous day. Some greeted him with a quick nod, others gave a small wave. He felt relieved that no one stared at him suspiciously. Most people seemed neutral or mildly appreciative. He assisted an older woman who struggled with a large package of bottled water. She thanked him and mentioned that she had seen him helping others before. Alfred replied politely, happy to be recognized in a positive way. Over the next few hours, Alfred continued this routine. He learned small details, like which customers preferred to handle their own items and which were glad for the help. He learned to approach people calmly, to speak clearly, and to keep a respectful distance until they agreed to his assistance. He noticed that Jacob and other employees occasionally glanced his way, ensuring he was doing well. He appreciated their silent support. Around midday, Alfred paused to drink some water and rest for a moment. A young cashier came outside to talk to him. She was curious about his background. Alfred answered honestly, telling her he had lost his home and wife in the hurricane. He said that he had been homeless for several years and had nearly lost hope, but that Mary and Jacob's kindness had given him a chance. The cashier listened without judgment. She said she was glad he was doing better now. Alfred nodded, feeling grateful for the genuine acceptance. He remembered how, a few days ago, he had felt invisible and unwanted. Now, even small conversations like this felt meaningful. He could see a path forward, step by step. In the afternoon, a couple of customers he had helped the previous day returned. This time they greeted him warmly, calling him by name. Alfred smiled, feeling more confident. He carried their bags again, loading them carefully into their car. The husband mentioned that he had been impressed by Alfred's work ethic and reliability. Alfred thanked him, trying not to show how moved he was by the compliment. With his daily earnings, Alfred began to set aside a small amount of money. He kept it in a secure place at the shelter. He knew he could not stay there forever. He wanted a simple room where he could keep his belongings and not worry about being turned away if it was full. He wanted a quiet space to think about the future. Maybe one day he could return to carpentry in some capacity, even if only making small repairs or building small pieces of furniture. In the late afternoon, Jacob approached him and asked how things were going. Alfred said they were going well. Jacob looked pleased and told Alfred he had received positive comments from a few customers. Alfred felt proud. He understood that trust was earned over time, and he was doing his best to maintain it. Mary stopped by again with a few items to purchase. She waved at Alfred and asked how he was adjusting. He said he was feeling better each day. She smiled and mentioned that sometimes small acts of kindness can change lives in unexpected ways. Alfred agreed quietly. He knew that helping Mary had changed his life. As the second day of work came to an end, Alfred realized that he no longer felt completely out of place at the supermarket. He had begun to find his rhythm, understanding when and how to approach people. He learned to stay patient, even if someone was rude or suspicious. He understood that not everyone would trust him immediately, but he did not take it personally. He focused on doing his job correctly and helping those who accepted his help. With the money he earned that day, he stopped by a nearby diner for a modest meal. He had not eaten properly in a long time. He sat at a corner table, enjoying a plate of simple food and a glass of cold water. He kept to himself, but he felt content. He knew that tomorrow he would go back and work again, slowly building a better life. He thought about Sophia and imagined her voice encouraging him. He had found a way to honor her memory by living with dignity. After his meal, Alfred returned to the shelter. He asked around for information on cheap rooms in the area. A man who worked at the shelter's desk gave him a few addresses. Alfred thanked him and planned to check them out when he had saved enough. He knew it would take time, but now he believed it was possible. That night, as he settled onto a bunk bed at the shelter, he felt tired but not hopeless. He understood that his life was still fragile, and he could lose what he had gained if he did not remain focused. But he had regained a sense of purpose. He had learned that some people cared enough to give him an opportunity. He had also learned that he could still contribute something valuable to his community. He closed his eyes, waiting for sleep to come. He did not pray out loud, but he felt something inside him that resembled faith. He had no elaborate words, just a quiet feeling that maybe there was a reason to believe things could improve. This feeling comforted him as he drifted off, ready to face another day and continue making progress. Over the next several days, Alfred settled into a steady routine at the supermarket. Each morning, he arrived early, dressed in clean clothes. He greeted a few employees who had grown used to his presence. He checked the parking lot and the main entrance, ready to help elderly customers with their groceries. He had learned how to approach them politely, without causing discomfort. He noticed that many of the customers who needed help were now expecting his presence. Some even waited near the exit, looking around as if searching for him. When they spotted Alfred, they waved him over with a friendly smile. Others began to greet him by name, and he responded respectfully, feeling more accepted. Alfred had saved most of his earnings, determined to move out of the shelter. After about a week of steady work, he counted his money carefully. It was not much, but it might be enough to rent a small, inexpensive room. He remembered the addresses the shelter's desk worker had given him. After his shift, he visited a few places and found a tiny room in an older building a few blocks away. The landlord was cautious at first, asking about Alfred's work. Alfred explained that he had a stable job now, and the landlord agreed to let him rent on a weekly basis. Alfred paid the first week's rent and received a key. That evening, Alfred moved a few belongings from the shelter to his new room. He had very little: a couple of changes of clothes, his blanket, and the medallion with Sophia's photo. The room was small and plain, with a single bed, a small table, and a chair. There was a shared bathroom down the hall. It was not much, but it was private. It was a step up from the shelter, and Alfred felt proud of this achievement. The next day, his routine continued. He helped customers load groceries. He carried heavy bags and made sure everyone felt safe and comfortable. He tried to learn their names, and many introduced themselves. He found that asking simple questions like how their day was going helped build trust. He did not share his full past unless someone asked, but he felt more confident mentioning that he had been a carpenter. Some customers asked if he still did any woodworking, and he said not at the moment, but maybe in the future. As time passed, Alfred realized that some people recognized him from his days standing outside the supermarket. He saw the surprise in their eyes when they realized he now worked there. He handled these moments calmly. He understood that people might remember him as a homeless man. But now, he was an employee providing a useful service. He hoped that over time, these memories would fade, replaced by his new role. Jacob checked in on him regularly. He asked if Alfred had any problems or if he needed anything. Alfred thanked him for the opportunity and said he was doing fine. Jacob seemed pleased. He mentioned that customer feedback was positive. Alfred found that reassuring. It meant he was doing a good job, not just performing a task to get paid. Mary visited the store more often than she used to. Sometimes she came just to pick up a few small items. Other times she accompanied neighbors or friends who also needed help. She always said hello to Alfred, asking how he was feeling. Alfred thanked her for checking on him. He understood that if he had never helped her carry those groceries, he might still be standing outside, waiting for spare change. Her situation had allowed him to prove himself in a way that led to this job. In the evenings after work, Alfred returned to his small room. He ate simple meals he bought from a nearby convenience store. He saved money whenever possible. He kept his room tidy. He took pride in living with some stability. He missed Sophia, but now the longing for her presence felt different. He tried to focus on positive steps toward a better future rather than dwelling only on loss. On one of his evenings off, Alfred decided to visit a local church. He remembered attending church with Sophia before the hurricane. Back then, faith had guided him. After losing so much, he had stopped going. He had felt abandoned and did not see the point, but recent events made him reconsider. Helping Mary, finding honest work, and earning trust again seemed like signs that not everything was lost. He walked to a small church a few blocks from his rented room. The building was plain and quiet. He entered and sat at the back pew. A few people were there, talking softly after a weekday prayer service. No one stared at him or questioned his presence. He felt safe and calm. He listened as a few individuals greeted each other. He did not join them yet. Instead, he sat quietly, reflecting on the changes in his life. When he left the church, he felt a sense of calm he had not felt in years. He did not know if he was ready to fully embrace his old faith, but he found comfort in this familiar environment. He planned to return, to watch, to listen, and maybe to speak to someone if he felt ready. The next day at work, he continued his routine. He helped a woman who recognized him from church. She nodded to him, saying she thought she saw him sitting in the back pew. Alfred admitted it was true, and she said he was welcome there any time. He smiled and carried her groceries, feeling more connected to the community than before. As he saved more money, Alfred considered buying a few basic carpentry tools. He knew he would not rebuild his old life overnight, but he might eventually do small repair jobs. It could provide extra income, or at least help him feel useful in a different way. He decided to focus on the present for now, continuing to improve his life step by step. In the quiet of his small room that night, Alfred held the medallion and looked at Sophia's picture. He thanked her silently for guiding him, even though she was no longer by his side. He believed that her memory had encouraged him to act kindly toward Mary that day. That single act had changed the course of his life. He felt that he could once again be the man Sophia would have been proud of. Alfred woke early as usual and prepared for another day of work. He left his small room, walked to the supermarket, and began his duties. He helped a gentleman who struggled to push a heavy cart. He carried a few bags for an older couple who thanked him repeatedly. He did everything with care, trying to make each interaction positive. He noticed Mary arriving around mid-morning. She greeted him, asked how he was doing, and introduced him to a friend who needed a bit of assistance. After he helped her friend, Mary chatted with Alfred for a few moments. She asked him if he had visited a church recently. Alfred admitted that he had gone to a small church near his room. Mary seemed glad to hear it. She mentioned that her own name was Mary, like many older women in the community. Alfred realized he had never told her about his mother sharing the same name. It felt personal, and he was not sure if he should mention it now. Instead, he just smiled and said that attending church made him feel less alone. Mary talked a bit about the neighborhood, about how many people had known each other for decades. She said that people noticed kindness and appreciated it. She reminded Alfred that he had done something valuable by helping her that day. He said he understood. He thanked her for remembering to return the medallion and for encouraging him to accept Jacob's offer. Mary said she believed everyone deserved a chance to start again. As the day went on, Alfred felt more comfortable talking to customers. He did not have many close friends, but he had acquaintances now. He recognized people by their cars, their habits, and the items they bought. Some customers began asking him simple questions, like where he was from. He answered calmly, saying he was from Texas, had once been a carpenter, and was now rebuilding his life. Some people offered encouraging words, saying they wished him luck. Others simply nodded in understanding. After work, Alfred decided to return to the church. He entered quietly, noticing that the doors were open for evening prayers. A small group of people sat near the front, speaking softly. Alfred took a seat a few rows back. He listened to their conversation and realized they were discussing a community event to help elders with home repairs. He remembered how he used to fix things and build furniture. He wondered if one day he could use those skills again. For now, he remained silent, but he felt the idea sparking something inside him. He still had his strength and knowledge. With time and tools, he might do small projects that benefited others. He saw a parallel between helping with groceries and helping with repairs. Both involved making life easier for those who needed assistance. As he sat there, a man from the group turned and noticed him. The man nodded and said hello. Alfred returned the greeting. The man mentioned that he had seen Alfred at the supermarket, helping customers. Alfred admitted that he worked there now. The man thanked him, saying that people in the neighborhood appreciated his help. Alfred felt slightly embarrassed, but also grateful. Later, as Alfred walked home, he thought about his journey. He had lost his home, his wife, and his faith after the hurricane. He had lived on the streets, feeling invisible and hopeless. Now he rented a small room, worked a steady job, and slowly felt his faith returning. He knew he was not the same person he had been before the hurricane. He carried scars and memories that would never fade. But he had found a path forward. He held the medallion in his pocket, feeling the shape of it against his fingertips. It reminded him that he had survived something terrible and still found kindness in the world. He tried to think of what Sophia would say if she could see him now. He guessed she would tell him to keep going, to keep trusting that good people existed. Back in his room, Alfred made a small meal. He organized his money, setting aside a bit more in savings. He had a goal to buy a few tools and perhaps do a small repair job if the opportunity arose. He thought about checking the church bulletin board for any community announcements related to home repairs. He wanted to give back in another way, just as Mary and Jacob had helped him. As the days continued, Alfred's routine remained steady. He worked at the supermarket, helped those in need, earned money, and returned home to rest. On weekends, he visited the church, listened, and sometimes joined simple discussions. He did not speak much, but he felt accepted. The church members recognized him as the kind helper from the store, and this gave him a sense of belonging. He learned that one of the older men at the church remembered Alfred as the carpenter who once built a fence for a neighbor before the hurricane. The man praised his craftsmanship. Alfred was surprised anyone remembered his past work. He felt a mixture of sadness and pride. Sadness for what he had lost, pride for what he had accomplished before tragedy struck. As time passed, Alfred's doubts about returning to faith and community life began to fade. He saw that the world was not only harsh, it also contained people who cared. He realized that by helping others, he found a reason to keep going. This was not a grand revelation. It was simply a fact of his new life. He accepted it without expecting miracles. When he knelt to pray one evening in the church, he did not ask for anything specific. He simply expressed gratitude for the small steps that led him here. He thanked whoever might be listening for the chance to rebuild his life and regain his dignity. He rose feeling calm and steady, ready to continue on his path. Alfred continued to work at the supermarket every day, He arrived on time and performed his duties consistently. He no longer felt as nervous as he had in the early days. He knew what to do and how to do it well. Customers who needed help found it easy to rely on him. His presence had become a normal part of the store's routine. One afternoon, a few weeks after he started working, Alfred noticed that he had saved enough money to invest in some basic carpentry tools. He asked Jacob if the supermarket had any simple repair tasks that needed doing, such as fixing a loose shelf or adjusting a door. Jacob was open to the idea and said he would think about it. He appreciated Alfred's willingness to help in other ways. Alfred visited a local hardware store after work. He found a used hammer, a screwdriver set, and a small saw at reasonable prices. He carried the tools back to his room, placing them carefully in a corner. He did not have a big toolbox or a workshop like before, but this was a start. He felt a sense of pride as he looked at these items. They represented a piece of his past craft, something he thought he had lost forever. The following day, Jacob approached him and mentioned a small fix needed in the storage area behind the store. A shelf was leaning and needed reinforcement. Alfred offered to handle it after his main duties were done. That evening, he used his tools to straighten and secure the shelf. It took him only a short time, but it felt like a victory. He was using his old skills again, doing honest work to improve his surroundings. Jacob thanked him and handed him a small bonus for the extra work. Alfred tried to refuse, saying it was a minor task, but Jacob insisted. Alfred accepted with gratitude, feeling that his identity as a carpenter had not disappeared completely. He understood that while he might not rebuild houses as he once did, he could still perform useful tasks. On a quiet evening, Alfred visited the church again. This time he spoke to a few people who remembered him from before. They asked how he was doing. He said he was stable, earning a living and feeling more hopeful. He listened as they discussed plans for helping elderly members of the community with small home repairs. This interested him. He mentioned that he had some experience in that area and might be able to assist. They welcomed his offer. He took note of a few addresses where minor repairs were needed. Nothing urgent, just small issues that had been neglected. He told them he would try to find time on his days off to look into it. They thanked him, pleased to have a volunteer. Over the next week, Alfred balanced his supermarket job with these small repair projects. He visited the homes of a few elderly neighbors. He tightened loose hinges, fixed a broken chair leg, and sealed a drafty window frame. Each time he completed a task, he saw relief and gratitude in their faces. Some insisted on paying him a little money, others offered a meal or homemade cookies. He appreciated every gesture, but what mattered most was feeling useful and connected. As he continued this pattern, Alfred realized that his life was becoming more complete. He had a place to live, a steady job, and a way to help others using his old skills. He still missed Sophia deeply. He still felt sadness when he thought about the hurricane and what he had lost. But now, that sadness was balanced by a sense of purpose. One evening, Alfred stopped by Mary's home on his way back from the church. He had no particular reason, other than to thank her once more. He knocked gently, and she opened the door, smiling warmly. He explained that he wanted to express his gratitude for how her situation had led him to this new chapter in his life. Mary invited him inside for a cup of tea. They sat in her small living room, talking quietly. Mary mentioned that she had noticed changes in the neighborhood since Alfred began working at the supermarket. People seemed to talk about him, pointing out how helpful he was and how he had turned his life around. Alfred felt a bit embarrassed, but he understood that people liked positive stories. It reminded them that kindness could produce good results. Mary also mentioned that her name, Mary, was common, but something about Alfred's reaction when he first met her had stayed in her mind. He finally explained that his own mother's name was Mary as well, and that helping her that day in the parking lot reminded him of helping his own mother in the past. Mary placed her hand gently on his arm, and said she believed that sometimes life brought people together for a reason. After this conversation, Alfred returned to his room feeling lighter. He understood now that part of his healing came from realizing these connections. The fact that Mary shared his mother's name was not just a coincidence. It symbolized how he could find comfort in unexpected places. Even though he tried not to think in terms of symbols or fate, he could not deny that meeting Mary had restored his faith in human nature. He kept working steadily at the supermarket, gaining the trust of more customers each day. He also continued to do small carpentry repairs for those who needed help. Over time, he built a modest network of people who appreciated his work. He did not plan to leave the supermarket job. He liked having a stable income. The carpentry tasks were more of a side activity that allowed him to reconnect with his old skills and his sense of identity. By now, Alfred attended church regularly. He prayed simply, thanking God for the opportunity to rebuild his life. He no longer felt abandoned. He saw that his actions mattered and that other people's kindness had made a difference. He believed that he could face the future without anger or despair. As the weeks turned into a couple of months, Alfred's life found a calm rhythm. He worked at the supermarket, helped elderly customers, saved his money, and maintained his small room. He took pride in living independently. He could pay his rent on time, buy his own meals, and maintain personal hygiene without relying on shelters. He had become known at the supermarket. Employees treated him like a colleague rather than a stranger. Jacob respected his dedication and considered giving him additional responsibilities. Mary stopped by often to say hello or ask if he was doing all right. Alfred felt that he had regained his dignity. He understood that the hurricane and the loss of Sophia had shaped him, but they had not destroyed him completely. One Sunday, Alfred attended the church service. He sat near the middle pews this time, not hiding in the back. The sermon was simple and focused on gratitude and helping one another. As the service ended, the congregation spoke quietly among themselves. Alfred found himself joining small conversations, exchanging polite greetings, and even receiving a few pats on the shoulder from people who admired his journey. After leaving the church, Alfred walked slowly through the neighborhood. He passed a few houses where he had fixed small things. He recognized faces at windows, people waving at him. He was no longer invisible. He belonged here in some way, even if his life was not what it used to be. He realized that he had found a new kind of stability, not just in material terms, but in his heart. He touched the medallion in his pocket. He had not lost it again. He considered it a sign that he could hold on to Sophia's memory without losing himself in grief. The medallion no longer felt like a painful reminder. Instead, it represented the love he once had and carried forward. He could honor that love by living well, helping others, and maintaining his faith. At the supermarket the next day, Alfred helped an elderly couple who were loading heavy boxes into their car. The wife said she remembered when Alfred first started working here, how shy and unsure he seemed. Now she saw confidence and kindness in his face. Alfred thanked her and said he simply wanted to do a good job. He understood that people noticed not only what he did, but also how he carried himself. Jacob approached Alfred later that afternoon. He asked if Alfred would be interested in a slightly different role in the future, maybe supervising the area where customers needed the most help. Alfred said he would think about it. He appreciated the trust Jacob placed in him. He had never imagined he would be considered a reliable employee after everything he had been through. Mary visited again that week. She asked Alfred if he was still attending church. He said he was, and he felt better inside because of it. She nodded, pleased. She mentioned that she had a small picture of her own mother that she kept in a drawer, and she understood how important certain keepsakes could be. Alfred thought about his medallion and appreciated her understanding. As time passed, Alfred realized that he no longer complained about his situation. He had accepted the changes in his life and found meaning in helping others. He had regained faith in himself and in the goodness of people around him. He did not have the house he once built, and Sophia was gone, but he had discovered that life could continue with purpose. He decided to never again complain about what he had lost. Instead, he focused on what he had gained: a job, a room, a community, and faith. He knew that life could be unpredictable and cruel, but it could also be generous. He felt that God was present again, not in dramatic signs, but in simple acts of kindness. On one clear morning, Alfred walked to work with a steady pace. The air was warm, and he could hear birds singing in the distance. He entered the supermarket, greeted the staff, and began his day. He helped customers without hesitation, lifting groceries and guiding them carefully. He nodded politely to those who recognized him, and he smiled when Mary walked by, knowing she was pleased to see him thriving. Alfred understood that he was no longer the homeless man standing silently outside the store. He was part of it now, part of a community that needed him. He knew he would continue attending church, building small connections, and maybe helping with minor repairs in the neighborhood. In doing so, he kept Sophia's memory alive, honored Mary's kindness, and respected Jacob's trust. He had found faith again. He did not proclaim it loudly or try to convince others. He simply lived it through his actions. He accepted that his life would never be the same as before, but he also saw that it did not have to be empty. He had dignity, work, faith, and a renewed sense of purpose. This was enough to give him peace.